Hello, I am Matty Dalrymple, and welcome to From Expertise to Authority, where we examine how you can build your professional presence for a sideline or second act. More resources are available at INDYAUTHOR.com, and that's Indy with a Y, including a downloadable worksheet that you can use to document your journey from expertise to authority. In this episode, we'll be exploring From Instinct to a Framework, why content creation is the bridge between what you know and what others can learn. And if you'd like to read the article this episode is based on, you'll find that at Substack at Matty Dalrymple. When I started building my From Expertise to Authority framework, I had a plan. I'd create a presentation first, distill everything I knew about the process into slides and bullet points, and then flesh those slides out into articles and eventually a book. But when I opened a blank presentation, I realized I needed to take a step back. I knew this material. I'd been living it for years through my consulting work, my podcast, and my own career. But the expertise that guided my one-on-one conversations with clients wasn't yet in a form I could transfer to a broader audience. It was intuitions, patterns I'd noticed, advice I'd given a dozen times in slightly different ways. My expertise was real, but it lived in my head in a way that was useful to me, but not yet useful to others. I needed to give it structure first. So instead of starting with a presentation, I started writing. And that's when the framework started to take shape, not because writing captured what I already knew, but because writing gave it a structure that made it accessible beyond my one-on-one conversations. The myth of just write it down. Most experienced professionals approach content creation as a packaging problem. You have expertise. Now you just need to put it into a format others can consume. Write the article, build the slide deck, record the episode. But if you've spent years, maybe decades, developing deep expertise, that knowledge is likely intuitive and internalized. You don't think in frameworks, you think in judgment calls. You don't operate from a system, you draw on accumulated experience that feels more like instinct than methodology. That's a sign of genuine mastery. But it means you can't just write it down because the transferable structure, doesn't exist yet. Your expertise works beautifully when you're applying it yourself or adapting it in real time for a specific client. The challenge is transforming that fluid situational knowledge into something others can learn from without you in the room. How writing builds the framework. When I sat down to write what became the first From Expertise to Authority article, I started with a simple question. What had I actually been doing when I helped my consulting clients figure out how to share their expertise? I'd been inventorying options, writing articles or books, podcasting, speaking, consulting. But as I wrote, I realized that these weren't a la carte items on a menu. They fell into groups based on the type of relationship they built. Written content established credibility. Conversational content, like podcasting, added personality and human connection. Direct engagement through speaking and consulting positioned someone as an authority. I'd been operating within this three-stage progression for years without naming it. That framework, expertise-based, personality-based, and authority-based relationships, didn't exist in transferable form before I wrote the article. It existed as tacit knowledge, the kind of understanding that shapes your advice without your being conscious of it. Writing made it explicit, not just to readers, but to me. The same thing happened with the next article, and the next. When I wrote about choosing where to focus, three distinct challenges emerged: expertise that's too broad, expertise that feels ordinary, and expertise that looks disconnected. I'd encountered all three with my clients, but I'd never categorized them. Writing forced the categorization. When I wrote about evaluating content strategically, three questions crystallized. Does it align with your expertise, serve your objective, and speak to your audience? These were principles I'd been applying intuitively. The article gave them a structure others could use. And each article made the next one easier to write, not just because I was building momentum, but because each one clarified the framework further, and that clarity opened up the next logical question. The three stages of relationship building naturally raised the question of how to identify the right areas of expertise to build those relationships around. Identifying the area of expertise raised the question of what you're trying to achieve: staying engaged, building influence, or earning income. I do seem to love frameworks that come in groups of three. Clarifying the objective raised the question of who your audience should be. Each article's conclusion pointed toward a question that only the next article could answer. The articles weren't distributing a pre-existing framework, they were building it. From personal knowledge to transferable structure. I'm not saying I stumbled into a framework by accident. I knew from the start that I wanted to develop a structured approach to authority building. And I planned from the beginning to create content across multiple formats. What surprised me was where in the process the structure emerged. I'd assumed the structure would come first, that I'd map out the framework in a presentation and then write about it. Instead, the writing was the mapping. The act of explaining my consulting approach to an audience of readers forced me to articulate connections I'd never needed to make explicit in one-on-one conversations. Patterns that I could adapt on the fly for a specific client became genuinely new frameworks when I had to make them clear and consistent on the page. This isn't unique to my experience, it's the nature of expert knowledge, and you demonstrate this tacit knowledge every time you give advice or make a judgment call. But you can't simply dictate it into existence. It has to be drawn out through a process, and for many professionals, creating content is the most effective process available. The important word in that sentence is process. Writing an article isn't a single act of transcription, it's a series of attempts, reorganizations, and revisions, each one sharpening what you actually mean. Why does this matter for your path? If you're an experienced professional looking to share your expertise, you may be feeling overwhelmed by everything you think you need to produce: articles, a slide deck, material for workshops or consulting, maybe a book. The sheer volume of deliverables can be paralyzing, especially when each one seems to require a fully developed framework you haven't built yet. The insight from my experience is that you don't need to build the framework first and then create the content. The content creation is the framework building. And you don't need to produce everything at once. You need to start somewhere and let each piece of content inform what comes next. Where you start will depend on how you think best. For me, writing was the process that transformed tacit knowledge into transferable structure. I needed the discipline of making ideas clear on the page. For you, it might be different. Maybe you think most clearly when you're talking, and a podcast conversation or a recorded presentation is what draws out your framework. Maybe you're a natural teacher, and standing in front of a classroom is where your expertise organizes itself into communicable form. Maybe building a slide deck really is your best starting point, not because you already have the bullet points, but because the constraints of that format force you to identify them. So what's your assignment? Write down your response to this question. If I had to make the most valuable thing I know accessible to someone else, what format seems most natural for me to use? Writing it? Outlining it? Diagramming it? Teaching it? Talking it through? Mentoring someone through it? Test it out using an aspect of your expertise that you want to convey. The goal is discovering what structure emerges when you stop adapting your expertise in real time and start making it concrete. Whatever the format, the principle is the same. The act of creating content for others transforms the expertise that's useful to you into expertise that's useful to them. Start with a format that suits your strengths and trust that the structure will emerge from the work. If you'd like support developing a personalized pathway from expertise to authority for yourself, please check out my consulting service at theindyauthor.com/authority. And if you're an event organizer, I'd love to share with your community a framework they can use to develop their own path. And if you'd like to get in touch, just drop me a note at Matty@mattydalrymple.com. Thank you for listening.